Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try help slow your spinning mind, enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you drift away. But before you do fall asleep, if you find Sleepy Time Tales helpful and you would like to support me, to keep it going out to you and thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. And if monthly is a bit much, you can also put a tip in the tip jar in the Ko-Fi. Both of these are linked in the show notes. Or you can support Sleepy Time Tales by simply spreading the word. If you know someone who's struggling to get a good night's sleep, just tell them where to find it. And that's enough of that. Let's find out about a young Mark Twain and the beginning of his travels. So snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. Roughing It by Mark Twain. Prefatory. This book is merely a personal narrative and not a pretentious history or a philosophical dissertation. It is a record of several years of variegated vagabondizing, and its object is rather to help the resting reader while away in idle hour than afflict him with metaphysics or goad him with science. Still, there is information in the volume, information concerning an interesting episode in the history of the Far West, about which no books have been written by persons who were on the ground in person, and saw the happenings of the time with their own eyes. I allude to the rise, growth, and culmination of the silver mining fever in Nevada, a curious episode in some respects, the only one of its peculiar kind that has occurred in the land, and the only one indeed that is likely to occur in it. Yes, I take it all around. There is quite a good deal of information in the book. I regret this very much, but really it could not be helped. Information appears to stew out of me naturally, like the precious ottar of roses out of the otter. Sometimes it has seemed to me that I would give worlds if I could retain my facts, but it cannot be. The more I coax up the sources and the tighter I get, the more I leak wisdom. Therefore I can only claim indulgence at the hands of the reader, not justification. The author. Chapter 1. My brother had just been appointed Secretary of the Nevada Territory, an office of such majesty that it concentrated in itself the duties and dignities of Treasurer, Comptroller, Secretary of State, and Acting Governor in the Governor's absence. A salary of $1,800 a year and the title of Mr. Secretary gave to the great position an air of wild and imposing grandeur. I was young and ignorant, and I envied my brother. I coveted his distinction and his financial splendor, but particularly and especially the long, strange journey he was going to make, and the curious new world he was going to explore. He was going to travel. I had never been far away from home, and that word travel had a seductive charm for me. Pretty soon he would be hundreds and hundreds of miles away, on the great plains and deserts, and among the mountains of the far west, and would see buffaloes and Indians and prairie dogs and antelopes, and have all kinds of adventures, and maybe get hanged or scalped, and have ever such a fine time, and write home and tell us all about it and be a hero. And he would see the gold mines and the silver mines, and maybe go about of an afternoon when his work was done, and pick up 2 or 3 pailfuls of shining slugs and nuggets of gold and silver on the hillside. And by he would become very rich, and return home by sea and be able to walk as calmly about San Francisco and the ocean and the isthmus as if it was nothing of any consequence to have seen those marvels face to face. What I suffered in contemplating his happiness pen cannot describe. And so when he offered me, in cold blood, the sublime position of private secretary under him, it appeared to me that the heavens and the earth passed away, and the firmament was rolled together as a scroll, I had nothing more to desire. My contentment was complete. At the end of an hour or two, I was ready for the journey. Not much packing up was necessary, because we were going in the overland stage from the Missouri frontier to Nevada, and passengers were only allowed a small quantity of baggage apiece. There was no Pacific Railroad in those fine times of 10 or 12 years ago. Not a single rail of it. I only proposed to stay in Nevada 3 months. I had no thought of staying longer than that. I meant to see all I could that was new and strange, and then hurry home to business. I little thought that I would not see the end of that 3-month pleasure excursion for 6 or 7 uncommonly long years. I dreamed all night about Indians, deserts, and silver bars, and in due time, next day, we took shipping at St. Louis Wharf on board a steamboat bound up the Missouri River. We were 6 days going from St. Louis to St. Joe, a trip that was so dull and sleepy and eventless that it has left no more impression on my memory than if its duration had been 6 minutes instead of that many days. No record is left in my mind now concerning it, but a confused jumble of savage-looking snags which we deliberately walked over with one wheel or the other, and of reefs which we butted, and then retired from and climbed over in some softer place, and of sandbars which we roosted on occasionally and rested, and then got out our crutches and sparred over. In fact, the boat might almost as well have gone to St. Joe by land, for she was walking most of the time anyhow, climbing over reefs and clambering over snags patiently and laboriously all day long. The captain said she was a bully boat, and all she wanted was more sheer and a bigger wheel. I thought she wanted a pair of stilts, but I had the deep sagacity not to say so. Chapter 2. The first thing we did on that glad evening that landed us in St. Joseph was to hunt up the stage office and pay $150 apiece for tickets per overland coach to Carson City, Nevada. The next morning, bright and early, we took a hasty breakfast and hurried to the starting place. Then an inconvenience presented itself which we had not properly appreciated before. Namely, that one cannot make a heavy traveling trunk stand for 25 pounds of baggage, because it weighs a good deal more. But that was all we could take, 25 pounds each. So we had to snatch our trunks open and make a selection in a good deal of hurry. We put our lawful 25 pounds apiece all in one valise and shipped the trunks back to St. Louis again. It was a sad parting, for now we had no swallowtail coats and white kid gloves to wear at Pawnee receptions in the Rocky Mountains, and no stovepipe hats, nor patent leather boots, nor anything else necessary to make life calm and peaceful. We were reduced to a war footing. Each of us put on a rough, heavy suit of clothing, woolen army shirt and stogie boots included, and into the valise we crowded a few white shirts, some underclothing, and such things. My brother, the secretary, took along about 4 pounds of United Statues and 6 pounds of unabridged dictionary, for we did not know, poor innocents, that such things could be bought in San Francisco on one day and received in Carson City the next. I was armed to the teeth with a pitiful little Smith & Wesson's 7-shooter, which carried a ball like a homeopathic ball, and it took the whole 7 to make a dose for an adult. But I thought it was grand. It appeared to me to be a dangerous weapon. It only had one fault. You could not hit anything with it. One of our conductors practiced a while on a cow with it, and as long as she stood still and behaved herself, she was safe. But as soon as she went to moving about, and he got to shooting other things, she came to grief. The secretary had a small-sized Colt's revolver strapped around him for protection, and to guard against accidents he carried it uncapped. Mr. George Bemis was dismally formidable. George Bemis was our fellow traveller. We had never seen him before. He wore in his belt an old original Allen revolver, such as irreverent people called a pepper box, simply drawing the trigger back, cocked, and fired the pistol. As the trigger came back, the hammer would begin to rise and the barrel to turn over, and presently down would drop the hammer, and away would speed the ball. To aim along the turning barrel and hit the thing aimed at was a feat which was probably never done with an Allen in the world. But George's was a reliable weapon nevertheless, because, as one of the stage drivers afterwards said, if she didn't get what she went after, she would fetch something else. And so she did. She went after a deuce of spades nailed against a tree once, and fetched a mule standing about 30 yards to the left of it. Bemis did not want the mule, but the owner came out with a double-barreled shotgun and persuaded him to buy it anyhow. It was a cheerful weapon, the Allen. Sometimes all its 6 barrels would go off at once, and then there was no safe place in all the region around it, but behind it. We took 2 or 3 blankets for protection against frosty weather in the mountains. In the matter of luxuries, we were modest. We took none along but some pipes and 5 pounds of smoking tobacco. We had 2 large canteens to carry water in, between stations on the plains, and we also took with us a little shot bag of silver coin for daily expenses, in the way of breakfasts and dinners. By 8 o'clock everything was ready, and we were on the other side of the river. We jumped into the stage, the driver cracked his whip, and we bowled away and left the States behind us. It was a superb summer morning, and all the landscape was brilliant with sunshine. There was a freshness and breeziness too, and an exhilarating sense of emancipation from all sorts of cares and responsibilities that almost made us feel that the years we had spent in the close, hot city, toiling and slaving, had been wasted and thrown away. We were spinning along through Kansas, and in the course of an hour and a half we were fairly abroad on the Great Plains. Just here the land was rolling, a grand sweep of regular elevations and depressions as far as the eye could reach, like the stately heave and swell of the ocean's bosom after a storm. And everywhere were cornfields, accenting with squares of deeper green this limitless expanse of grassy land. But presently the sea upon dry ground was to lose its rolling character and stretch away for 700 miles as level as a floor. Our stage was a great swinging and swaying stage of the most sumptuous description, an imposing cradle on wheels. It was drawn by 6 handsome horses, and by the side of the driver sat the conductor, the legitimate captain of the craft, for it was his business to take charge and care of the mails, baggage, express matter, and passengers. We 3 were the only passengers this trip. We sat on the back seat inside. About all the rest of the coach was full of mail bags, for we had 3 days' delayed mails with us. Almost touching our knees, a perpendicular wall of mail matter rose up to the roof. There was a great pile of it strapped on top of the stage, and both the fore and hind boots were full. We had 2,700 pounds of it aboard, the driver said, and a little for Brigham and Carson and Frisco, but the heft of it for the engines, which is powerful troublesome, though they get plenty of truck to read. But as he just then got up, a fearful convulsion of his countenance, which was suggestive of a wink being swallowed by an earthquake, we guessed that his remark was intended to be facetious, and to mean that we would unload the most of our mail matter somewhere on the plains, and leave it to the Indians or whosoever wanted it. We changed horses every 10 miles all day long, and fairly flew over the hard, level road. We jumped out and stretched our legs every time the coach stopped, so the night found us still vivacious and unfatigued. After supper a woman got in who lived about 50 miles further on, and we 3 had to take turns at sitting outside with the driver and conductor. Apparently she was not a talkative woman. She would sit there in the gathering twilight, and fasten her steadfast eyes on a mosquito rooting into her arm, and slowly she would raise her other hand until she had got his range, and then she would launch a slap at him that would have jolted a cow, and after that she would sit and contemplate the corpse with tranquil satisfaction, for she never missed her mosquito. She was a dead shot at short range. She never removed a carcass, but left them there for bait. I sat by this grim sphinx and watched her kill 30 or 40 mosquitoes. Watched her and waited for her to say something, but she never did. So I finally opened the conversation myself. I said, "The mosquitoes are pretty bad about here, madam." "You bet." "What did I understand you to say, madam?" "You bet." Then she cheered up and faced around and said, "Danged if I didn't begin to think you fellas was deaf and dumb. I thought, begosh, here I've sot and sot a sot, a bustin' mosquitoes and wondering what was ailing you. First I thought you was deaf and dumb, then I thought you was sick or crazy or something, and then by and by I began to reckon you was a passel of sickly fools that couldn't think of nothing to say. Where'd you come from?" The Sphinx was a Sphinx no more. The fountains of her great deep were broken up, and she reigned the 9 parts of speech 40 days and 40 nights, metaphorically speaking, and buried us under a desolating deluge of trivial gossip that left not a crag or pinnacle or of rejoinder projecting above the tossing waste of dislocated grammar and decomposed pronunciation. How we suffered. She went on, hour after hour, till I was sorry I ever opened the mosquito question and gave her a start. She never did stop again until we got to her journey's end toward daylight, and then she stirred us up as she was leaving the stage, for we were nodding by that time, and said, "Now you get out of Cottonwood, you fellas, and lay over a couple of days. I'll be along sometime tonight, and if I can do you any good by edging a word now and then, I'm right there. Folks will tell you I've always been kind of offish and particular for a girl that's raised in the woods, and I am, with a ragtag and bobtail, and a gal has to be if she wants to be anything. But when people comes along which is my equals, I reckon I'm a pretty sociable heifer after all." We resolved not to lay by at Cottonwood. Chapter 3. About an hour and a half before daylight we were bowling along smoothly over the road, so smoothly that our cradle only rocked in a gentle, lulling way that was gradually soothing us to sleep and dulling our consciousness, when something gave way under us. We were dimly aware of it, but indifferent to it. The coach stopped. We heard the driver and conductor talking together outside and rummaging for a lantern, and swearing because they could not find it. But we had no interest in whatever had happened, and it only added to our comfort to think of those people out there at work in the murky night, and we snug in our nest with the curtains drawn. But presently, by the sounds, there seemed to be an examination going on, and then the driver's voice said, "By Joyce, the through brace is broke." This startled me broad awake, as an undefined sense of calamity is always apt to. I said to myself, now a thorough brace is probably part of a horse, and doubtless a vital part too, from the dismay in the driver's voice. Leg maybe. And yet how could he break his leg waltzing along such a road as this? No, it can't be his leg. That is impossible unless he was reaching for the driver. Now what can be the thorough brace of a horse, I wonder? Well, whatever comes, I shall not air my ignorance in this crowd anyway. Just then the conductor's face appeared at a lifted curtain, and his lantern glared in on us and our wall of mail matter. He said, "Gents, you'll have to turn out a spell. Thorough brace is broke." We climbed out into a chill drizzle and felt ever so homeless and dreary. What I found that the thing they called a thorough brace was a massive combination of belts and springs which the coach rocks itself in. I said to the driver, "I never saw a thorough brace used up like that before, that I can remember. How did it happen?" "Why, it happened by trying to make one coach carry 3 days' mail, that's how it happened," said he. "And right here is the very direction which is wrote on all the newspaper bags, which was to be put out for the engines to keep 'em quiet. It's most uncommon lucky, because it's so nation dark. I could have gone by unbeknowns if that air thorough brace hadn't broke." I knew he was in labor with another one of those winks of his, though I could not see his face, because he was bent down at work, and wishing him a safe delivery, I turned to and helped the rest get out the mail sacks. It made a great pyramid by the roadside when it was all out. When they had mended the thorough brace, we filled the 2 boots again, but put no mail on top, and only half as much inside as there was before. The conductor bent all the seat backs down and then filled the coach, just half full of mail bags from end to end. We objected loudly to this, for it left us no seats. But the conductor was wiser than we, and said a bed was better than seats, and moreover this plan would protect his thorough braces. We never wanted any seats after that. The lazy bed was infinitely preferable. I had many an exciting day subsequently lying on it, reading the statutes and the dictionary, and wondering how the characters would turn out. The conductor said he would send back a guard from the next station to take charge of the abandoned mail bags, and we drove on. It was now just dawn, and as we stretched our cramped legs full length on the mail sacks, and gazed out through the windows across the wide wastes of greenswood, clad in cool, powdery mist, to where there was an expectant look in the eastern horizon, our perfect enjoyment took the form of a tranquil and contented ecstasy. The stage whirled along at a spanking gait, the breeze flapping curtains and suspended coats in a most exhilarating way. The cradle swayed and swung luxuriously, the pattering of the horse's hoofs, the cracking of the driver's whip, and his hi-yi galang were music. The spinning ground and the waltzing trees appeared to give us a mute hurrah as we went by, and then slack up and look after us with interest or envy or something. And as we lay and smoked the pipe of peace, and compared all this luxury with the years of tiresome city life that had gone before it, we felt that there was only one complete and satisfying happiness in the world, and we had found it. After breakfast, at some station whose name I have forgotten, we 3 climbed up on the seat behind the driver, and let the conductor have our bed for a nap. And by, when the sun made me drowsy, I lay down on my face on top of the coach, grasping the slender iron railing, and slept for an hour or more. That will give one an appreciable idea of those matchless roads. Instinct will make a sleeping man grip a fast hold of the railing when the stage jolts, but when it only swings and sways, no grip is necessary. Overland drivers and conductors used to sit in their places and sleep 30 or 40 minutes at a time on good roads, while spinning along at a rate of 8 or 10 miles an hour. I saw them do it often. There was no danger about it. A sleeping man will seize the irons in time when the coach jolts. These men were hard worked, and it was not possible for them to stay awake all the time. By and by we passed through Marysville and over the Big Blue and Little Sandy. Thence about a mile and we entered Nebraska. About a mile further on we came to the Big Sandy, 180 miles from St. Joseph. As the sun was going down, we saw the first specimen of an animal known familiarly over 2,000 miles of mountain and desert, from Kansas clear to the Pacific Ocean, as the jackass rabbit. He is well named. He is just like any other rabbit, except that he is from 1/3 to twice as large, has longer legs in proportion to his size, and has the most preposterous ears that ever were mounted on any creature but a jackass. When he is sitting quiet, thinking about his sins, or is absent-minded or unapprehensive of danger, his majestic ears project above him conspicuously, but the breaking of a twig will scare him nearly to death, and then he tilts his ears back gently and starts for home. All you can see then for the next minute is his long grey form stretched out straight and streaking it through the low sagebrush, head erect, eyes right, and ears just canted a little to the rear, but showing you where the animal is, all the time, the same as if he carried a jib. Now and then he makes a marvelous spring with his long legs, high over the stunted sagebrush, and scores a leap that would make a horse envious. Presently he comes down to a long, graceful lope, and shortly he mysteriously disappears. He has crouched behind a sagebrush and will sit there and listen and tremble until you get within 6 feet of him, when he will get under way again. But one must shoot at this creature once if he wishes to see him throw his heart into his heels, and do the best he knows how. He's frightened clear through now, and he lays his long ears down on his back, straightens himself out like a yardstick every spring he makes, and scatters miles behind him with an easy indifference that is enchanting. Our party made the specimen hump himself, as the conductor said. The secretary started him with a shot from the Colt. I commenced spitting at him with my weapon, and all in the same instant, the old Allen's whole broadside let go with a rattling crash, and it is not putting it too strong to say that the rabbit was frantic. He dropped his ears, set up his tail, and left for San Francisco at a speed which can only be described as a flash and a vanish. Long after he was out of sight, we could hear him whiz. I do not remember where we first came across sagebrush, but as I have been speaking of it, I may as well describe it. It is easily done, for if the reader can imagine a gnarled and venerable live oak tree, reduced to a little shrub 2 feet high, with its rough bark, its foliage, its twisted boughs, all complete, he can picture the sagebrush exactly. Often on lazy afternoons in the mountains, I've lain on the ground with my face under a sagebrush, and entertained myself with fancying that the gnats among its foliage were Lilliputian birds, and that the ants marching and countermarching about its base were Lilliputian flocks and herds, and myself, some vast loafer from Brobdingnag, waiting to catch a little citizen and eat him. It is an imposing monarch of the forest in exquisite miniature, is the sagebrush. Its foliage is a greyish-green and gives that tint to desert and mountain. It smells like our domestic sage, and sage tea from it tastes like the sage tea which all boys are so well acquainted with. The sagebrush is a particularly hardy plant and grows right in the midst of deep sand and among barren rocks where nothing else in the vegetable world would try to grow, except bunchgrass. Bunchgrass grows on the bleak mountainsides of Nevada and neighboring territories, and offers excellent feed for stock, even in the dead of winter where the snow is blown aside and exposes it, notwithstanding its unpromising home. Bunchgrass is a better and more nutritious diet for cattle and horses than almost any other hay or grass that is known, so stockmen say. The sage bushes grow from 3 to 6 or 7 feet apart, all over the mountains and deserts of the far west, clear to the borders of California. There is not a tree of any kind in the deserts for hundreds of miles. There is no vegetation at all in a regular desert except the sagebrush and its cousin the greasewood, which is so much like the sagebrush that the difference amounts to little. Campfires and hot suppers in the deserts would be impossible but for the friendly sagebrush. Its trunk is as large as a boy's wrist, and from that up to a man's arm, and its crooked branches are half as large as its trunk. All good, sound, hard wood, very like oak. When a party camps, the first thing to be done is to cut sagebrush, and in a few minutes there is an opulent pile of it ready for use. A hole a foot wide, 2 feet deep, and 2 feet long is dug, and sagebrush chopped up and burned in it till it is full to the brim with glowing coals. Then the cooking begins, and there is no smoke and consequently no swearing. Such a fire will keep all night with very little replenishing, and it makes a very sociable campfire, and one around which the most impossible reminiscences sound plausible, instructive, and profoundly entertaining. Sagebrush is very fair fuel, but as a vegetable it is a distinguished failure. Nothing can abide the taste of it but the jackass and his illegitimate child, the mule. But the testimony to its nutritiousness is worth noting, for they will eat pine knots or anthracite coal, or brass fillings or lead pipe, or old bottles, or anything that comes handy, and then going off looking as grateful as if they had oysters for dinner. Mules and donkeys and camels have appetites that anything will relieve temporarily, but nothing satisfy. In Syria once, at the headwaters of the Jordan, a camel took charge of my overcoat while the tents were being pitched, and examined it with a critical eye all over, and with as much interest as if he had an idea of getting one made like it. And then after he was done figuring on it as an article of apparel, he began to contemplate it as an article of diet. He put his foot on it and lifted one of the sleeves out with his teeth, and chewed at it, gradually taking it in, and all the while opening and closing his eyes as in a kind of religious ecstasy, as if he had never tasted anything as good as an overcoat before in his life. Then he smacked his lips once or twice, and reached after the other sleeve. Next he tried the velvet collar, and smiled a smile of such contentment that it was plain to see that he regarded that as the daintiest thing about an overcoat. The tails went next, along with some percussion caps and cough candy, and some fig paste from Constantinople. And then my newspaper correspondence dropped out, and he took a chance at that. Manuscript letters written for the home papers. But he was treading on dangerous ground now. He began to come across solid wisdom in those documents that was rather weighty on his stomach, and occasionally he would take a joke that would shake him up till it loosened his teeth. It was getting to be perilous at times with him, but he held his grip with good courage, and hopefully till at last he began to stumble on statements that not even a camel could swallow with impunity. He began to gag and gasp, and his eyes to stand out, and his forelegs to spread, and in about a quarter of a minute he fell over, as stiff as a carpenter's workbench. I went and pulled the manuscript out of his mouth and found that the sensitive creature had choked on one of the mildest and gentlest statements of fact that I ever laid before a trusting public. I was about to say, when diverted from my subject, that occasionally one finds sagebrushes 5 or 6 feet high, and with a spread of branch and foliage in proportion, but 2 or 2.5 feet is the usual height. Chapter 4. As the sun went down and the evening chill came on, we made preparation for bed. We stirred up the hard letter sacks and the knotty canvas bags of printed matter, knotty and uneven because of projecting ends and corners of magazines, boxes, and books. We stirred them up and redisposed them in such a way as to make our bed as level as possible. And we did improve it too, though after all our work, it had an upheaved and billowy look about it, like a little piece of a stormy sea. Next we hunted up our boots from odd nooks among the mailbags where they had settled and put them on. Then we got down our coats, vests, pantaloons, and heavy woolen shirts from the arm loops where they had been swinging all day, and clothed ourselves in them. For there being no ladies either at the station or in the coach, and the weather being hot, we had looked to our comfort by stripping to our underclothing at 9 o'clock in the morning. All things being now ready, we stowed the uneasy dictionary where it would lie as quiet as possible, and placed the water canteens and pistols where we could find them in the dark. Then we smoked a final pipe, swapped a final yarn, after which we put the pipes, tobacco, and bag of coins in snug holes and caves among the mail bags, and then fastened down the coach curtains all around, and made the place as dark as the inside of a cow, as the conductor phrased it in his picturesque way. It was certainly as dark as any place could be. Nothing was even dimly visible in it. And finally, we rolled ourselves up like silkworms, each person in his own blanket, and sank peacefully to sleep. And, with our cast of characters falling asleep, I think I'm going to call it a night right here. As always, if you'd like to pick up where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.